Good evening, friends, and welcome to AMA. It's going to be a very, very good evening. I can feel it, the excitement in the group. We have a very august author with us today, and it's my pleasant task to introduce him to this group today on this wonderful evening, Shri Gurcharan Das. Shri Gurcharan Das is an author, commentator, and former CEO of Procter & Gamble India. His latest book, India Grows at Night, A Liberal Case for a Strong State, was on FT's Best Books for 2013. His much acclaimed Difficulty of Being Good is a riveting examination of governance and corruption in the modern world, said Newsweek. His international bestseller, India Unbound, is a quiet earthquake, according to The Guardian, and available in 17 languages and filmed as well in BBC. Shri Gurcharan Das studied philosophy at Harvard University and later attended Harvard Business School AMP, where he is featured in 3 case studies. After heading Procter & Gamble India and Southeast Asia, he became Managing Director, Procter & Gamble Worldwide for Strategic Planning. Prior to P&G, he was Chairman and Managing Director of Richardson Hindustan Limited from 1981 to 1985, the company where he started as a trainee. At 50, he retired early and became a full-time writer. He writes a regular column for 5 Indian newspapers, including the Times of India, and contributes to Financial Times London, Wall Street Journal US, Foreign Affairs, and the New York Times. He is a speaker to some of the world's largest corporations and has served on the juries of Templeton Prize, Milton Friedman Prize, and Mackenzie Award. His other literary works include a novel, A Fine Family, a book of essays, The Elephant Paradigm, and an anthology, 3 plays consisting of Laran Sahib, a prize-winning play about the British in India, which has been presented at the Edinburgh Festival. Meera, which was produced off-Broadway to critical acclaim from New York critics, and 9 Jako Hill, which has been performed in major Indian cities. He is presently editing for Penguin the story of Indian business in 15 volumes, of which 6 have already appeared. He is a prolific writer, a brilliant commentator, master of current development and sharing and perspectives, and I must say he's a beacon of clarity and a refreshing change in our confused times. I also want to thank AMA for bringing together today all of us, amongst us, an illustrious celebrity, sir. Thank you for being with us today evening, sir.
The book also has a lovely cover, you must have seen, and it is not coincidental the fact that in India we have a god called Kama, and this is the 3rd volume in the trilogy of Artha, Dharma and Kama, the Purusharthas, and so the Trivarga. And it's called Kama, the Riddle of Desire. And let me just tell you what these flowers mean. This is the white lotus. Kama is, by the way, the god of love and desire. And in fact, I believe we should change the name Valentine's Day to Kama Deva Divas or Kama Utsav. And I hope you'll join the movement, because I think it would be more appropriate to have our own God rather than Saint Valentine for celebrating love and desire. Let me come back to the cover, but I'm going to talk about the difference between making a living and making a life. We all want to live a happy and meaningful life. Yet, too many of us live empty, meaningless lives. I have always believed in a one-line definition of happiness. It is to love the work you do and to love the person you live with. Very simple. To love the work you do and love the person you live with. Now, but the trouble is that most people I know do not love the work they do and often do not love the person they live with. Neither our parents nor our teachers have taught us to do either of these two things. And so I'm going to talk about this. And therefore, I will divide this talk into two parts. First part is about learning to love the work you do, and the second part is learning to love the person you live with. So this book concerns the second part of this. And let me begin with my own life. I grew up in a middle-class home. My father was an engineer with the government of Punjab. He helped to build Bhakra Dam. And one of my earliest memories is when I was in class 1. And I came home one morning, I came home one afternoon from school, carrying my report card, waving it to my mother, and she asked, "Did you stand first?" And instead of that, she did not ask whether what I had enjoyed in school or what I had learned in school and was I happy in school. She was basically interested in how well I was doing. And so ever since childhood, I was told to work hard at my studies, get good marks so that I would get into a good college. With my family's middle-class insecurities, when I went to college, my parents said, "Make sure you take useful subjects, safe subjects, so that you can max in the exams and then make a career either as an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer and get a good job." For them, that was the purpose of an education. Neither my parents nor my teachers helped plant the seed of what I called heroic ardor or helped me to discover a passion. Anyway, I got a reasonably good job after college, and that pleased my parents. I got married, got a house, had 2 children, worked hard to get those children into a good school, and spent the next 25 years climbing ladders at work and helping my wife bring up these unruly children. And then basically I followed the formula of my parents with my own children. One day in my 40s, mid-40s, I came to work in the morning and saw a pile of papers that needed urgent attention on my desk. And I got depressed. Instead of going to the papers, I went to the window and looked out at the blue sky. And I said to myself, is this what life is all about? And so I returned home that evening feeling very discontented. And I poured out my unhappiness to my wife and felt that I had basically, I said I seem to have stumbled through life, intent on the next promotion and getting the kids to grow up. And in the meantime, I felt life had passed me by. And I felt that my life had been empty and unfulfilled. And it was a tragic loss. So I said, maybe I should quit this rat race before it's too late. My wife said, Cha, you're just having a midlife crisis. You'll get over it. But the reality is that I waited to get over it, but I didn't get over it. So when I reached 50, I quit my job to become a full-time writer. And my wife was a good sport. She agreed to give up the trappings of the corporate life. And I told her that now your standard of living won't go up, but I hope it won't go too far down. And so I, had started a new career. But there's something I haven't told you. And that is that I did not follow my parents' advice when I went to college. I discovered the humanities in college. I read voraciously. I read the classics. I took courses in history, philosophy, economics, even Sanskrit. And this was at Harvard when I took Sanskrit. And I read the great books, Plato, Aristotle, Marx, Freud, Darwin, Mahabharata, Tolstoy, Shakespeare, and more. And I continued this habit of reading after my college. And then I asked myself one day, one can't keep reading only, and that's taking in. One has to return back something of what you are reading. And so the idea came about writing. And so I became a weekend writer. While my friends in the corporate world played golf on weekends, I wrote. And as you just said, it also, helped me to clear my thoughts about what I was reading when I started to write. And so in my 20s, I wrote 3 plays, and in my 30s, I wrote a novel, which helped me to hone my skills as a writer. And I was lucky. My first play won a prize, got produced in Bombay. Alec Padamsee directed it. And later it was done on BBC. And my second play was done off-Broadway in New York, and was a play about Mirabai. And they set it to hard rock music, the bhajans of Mira, to hard rock, the best production I've seen. And the third play was called Nine Jaku Hill, which traveled around the country and was quite popular. And these plays still get produced. I wrote a novel, a partition novel, family novel in my 30s called A Fine Family, and Shyam Benegal bought the rights to it, but that wretched fellow has not made the movie yet. And anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that when I quit the corporate world, I already had confidence in my ability because I had cultivated a hobby, a weekend hobby, which I translated into a full-time occupation. And so in this way, I think I discovered my passion early in my 20s. And I avoided the great tragedy, which is not untimely death. We think of untimely death as a tragedy, but a life of emptiness. We are not all like Mozart, the music genius, who knew at the age of 3 that he was a musical genius. Most of us stagger through life, and if we are lucky, we stumble onto a passion, as I did in my 20s. And this is why I believe it's your responsibility as parents, grandparents, teachers, to help the young to discover a passion. That passion, if you have that, now it can be your work also. The passion of it's very, the important thing is that you should feel strongly about it. And there are many ways and many kinds of passion. But in my case, it was the great books. And if you were to Google great books when you go home, or the great books program, you will find 100 books will pop up. All the great books. Now, the American undergraduate liberal education for the first 2 years specializes in just your reading these great books. And there are some colleges in America where over 4 years you only read these 100 books, nothing else. The reason I say that is because in my case, at least, this helped me to discover a passion. So I can only tell you about my experience. And so I have found that making a life is not about finding yourself. It is about creating yourself. And everyone can do it. And one test you can take, that when you have found your passion, then time gets distorted because you get so absorbed in what you are doing that you say, oh my God, it's already 7 o'clock. I thought it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 hours disappeared in your life and you had forgotten yourself. So it is the idea of self-forgetting. The self is the main problem which creates our unhappiness for us. And that's why Krishna reminded Arjuna about Nishkam Karma, because what he was telling him is really the same thing, that your work will be good if you don't care who gets the credit. That is basically the idea of Nishkam Karma. So now, this is the first part of the talk. Let me tell you a little bit about the second part of the talk, which is how to learn the second secret of happiness, how to learn to live, to love the person you live with. Again, nobody teaches us that. Our parents don't teach it, our teachers don't teach it. And this book of mine, which is Karma, the Riddle of Desire, deals precisely with this aspect. And I said it's the third volume of the Purusharthas, Artha, Dharma, Kama. And so during Diwali, my publishers tell me they will bring out a box set of Artha, Dharma, Kama, India Unbound, Difficulty of Being Good and Kama. And there is also a fourth Purushartha, which is moksha. Now people ask me, are you going to next write about moksha? And I don't know. I don't know. The nice thing is that you can be a practicing, successful Hindu without believing in God or soul or reincarnation or the afterlife. That is the wonderful thing about our tradition. It makes room for everybody. So at least let me now tell you a little bit. The reason I bring up the four Purusharthas again is that they provide another alternative definition to happiness. In other words, our ancient wisdom of our country was that we all have certain capabilities. Capabilities for artha, material well-being, for dharma, moral well-being, kama, emotional well-being, and moksha, spiritual well-being. These are potentialities, capabilities we have, and the secret to happiness was to fulfill all these four and bring them, because they conflict very often, and they bring them to harmony. So kama means desire and pleasure. And when I was writing this biography of an emotion, I quickly realized that you can't write about this subject without a story. You can't write a dry philosophical essay. You need to tell a story, and so I am telling a story. It's a fictional memoir of a man called Amar. Now he's old, he's looking back on his life. And so I'll give you an idea, a couple of incidents in his life. He says, the first memory of desire that I have is when I was 4 years old. And it was cold in the morning when I woke up by mistake at dawn. And I felt lonely. And so I rushed to my mother's bed. I jumped in, nestled beside her, and fell blissfully asleep. Then the narrator stops the story. And he says, desire can strike early in life, but it can also strike early in a civilization. So unlike the Judeo-Christian tradition of the West, where it says in the beginning was light. In Genesis, in the Bible, it says God said, let there be light. In the Rig Veda, which is our earliest book, and written much before the Bible, it says in the beginning was Kama. And the cosmos was created from the seed of Kama in the mind of the one. And so he asks this question, what does it say about a civilization where in the beginning was desire? And then he says that India is the only civilization in the world which elevated karma to a goal of life. And it is our ancients realized that karma is the source of all action. You wouldn't wake up in the morning if you did not feel desire. It's the source of creation, and it's the source of procreation. It is the animating principle of the human cell, which would die without karma. And so they elevated it to a goal of life, and they even created a god named karma. So let me, then a few pages later, the story goes on, and he again stops the story because again as a youngster, he talks about he feels loneliness, and so he stops the story, and then he says, now how did the species, the human species, the human race get created? And here he then talks about a verse in the Atharva Veda. Earlier it was the Rig Veda, this is Atharva, a few centuries later. Rig Veda is 1500 BC, Atharva Veda is about 1100 BC. And it is now about, the one has become Prajapati. And Prajapati feels lonely. And so because he's big in size, he slices himself into two, and a woman is born. And he feels desire for the woman to sort of solve his problem of loneliness. But so he moves towards her, and she runs away and says, what are you doing? You just gave birth to me. You are like my father. Anyway, so she runs and turns into a doe, a female deer. And he turns himself into a male deer. And they copulate, and that is how the deer population is created. Then she runs and becomes a cow, and he becomes a bull, and that is how the cow population is created. And then this is how the human population is created, and all the way down to ants and all the creatures. And I think this is a very much more interesting and colorful account than Darwin gives us about the origin of species. But it also says that the pleasure we get from sex is partly a compensation of the lonely human condition. And the other day, a friend of mine said, it's not just that. It is also a compensation for the pain of bringing up our children. Because the human child is the most difficult child in the universe to bring up. Anyway, so now let me jump when Amar is in his 40s. So Amar is in his 40s, and by this time, desire has waned in his life. The hard work of climbing ladders at work, bringing up children, this happens to all of us. Desire wanes. And so he also feels a sense of discontent about his life. And so he takes a journey. And those of you who takes a journey, he has to go to Pune, for some work. And as he gets in at the VT station, you take the Deccan Queen, those of you who know Bombay, and from VT to go to Pune. He gets into the train, and soon a beautiful woman climbs into the train and sits nearby. And like polite strangers, they make nice, polite conversation about impersonal subjects like the weather, etc. But soon that conversation begins to get more personal because they realize there is chemistry between the two of them. And by the end of the journey, the conversation has become very intimate, and they both realize that they could have an affair. So, as he's going in the car to his work, where he has come for, and she has gone away, and they have exchanged addresses and phone numbers, like good friends, and then he thinks, what if I did have an affair? What would be the consequence? So the first consequence, he says, my marriage will break. And I will hurt the person I love the most in this world, which is my wife. I will also hurt my children. And so he doesn't like that idea. But he says, maybe we could keep it secret. But if we keep it secret, what will be the consequence of that? The consequence of that will be that I will have to lie. And lies will have to be piled upon more lies. And soon I will forget the difference between truth and lies. And so I will become an inauthentic human being. And I don't want to be that either. So then he says, maybe I shouldn't have an affair. But what will be the consequence of not having the affair? And the consequence of that will be, he says, that I may resent this one moment that I had for a certain thrilling kind of happiness before I die. And I gave up that chance. And I may then resent myself, resent my family, and end up as a shriveled, mean, old man. And I don't want that either. So this is a classic conflict between dharma, duty to another, and karma, duty to yourself. In other words, do I betray my wife or do I betray myself? Most of you don't think like this. But there is in the classical tradition a sense that karma is not only the cosmic animating principle which created the universe, but it is also a kind of duty. That's why we elevated it. To realize karma, there's a duty to yourself. So, then what happens? So, he's confused, and I won't tell you what he does. You have to read the book for that. The answer of the Kama Sutra is an interesting one. The Kama Sutra says that every handsome man, when he sees a beautiful woman, he feels desire for her. And every beautiful woman, when she sees a handsome man, feels desire for him. But after some consideration, the matter goes no further. Imagine Kama Sutra. Most of us think that Kama Sutra is a book of sexual positions, but actually it is a book of good manners. Let me give you an example. The one piece of advice the Kama Sutra gives to the Nagaraka. Nagaraka is a man about town. And it gives the advice that if you want to be socially successful, don't speak about yourself when you meet someone. Speak about the other person. Speak about her if you meet a woman. Second advice it gives, if you want to be socially successful, don't speak in Sanskrit. In those days, the educated people, we speak in English. They used to speak in Sanskrit. And so the Kama Sutra says, your other person, she will think you are a show-off. And you don't want to come out sounding like a show-off. The third piece of advice it gives is to the seducer. And it says to the seducer, if you want to be successful, make sure you give her pleasure first before you think of your own pleasure. All good advice from the Kama Sutra. So, the other implication of this story, this dilemma of Amar, his name is Amar, is that he realizes that there are stages of life. In the Kama tradition, you see the god, Kama, we're going to celebrate Kama Devas from next year, Kama Utsav. That the god Kama has a bow and it's made of sugarcane and the string is made of honeybees and he shoots arrows, but instead of arrows he shoots flowers. So in the first stage of desire, which is the white lotus on this cover, the two persons meet, the man and the woman meet, and there is fascination. And Kama strikes with his first flower. The second stage of desire is the Ashoka flower. And this is when they decide to do something about it. The third stage of desire is intimacy, and usually marriage. And this is when you have children and you work hard, and I've been describing all that to you, and desire wanes. So Amar is in the fourth stage when he meets this beautiful woman on the Deccan Queen. And this is the challenging place. Is the idea here is that what our ancient sages taught us is that desire changes at every stage, every decade of one's life, desire changes. And wisdom lies in your ability to make that each stage creative, each decade creative, so that you can change the desire. Our tradition is not like the typical American home where the husband comes home one day and tells his wife, honey, I think I've fallen out of love with you, let's get a divorce. Now that was not our tradition. Anyway, the point is, this is the last stage, which is when desire dies, and that's the sandalwood flower. So, Amar is sad, and he's thinking to himself, why does life have to be so complicated? And particularly Kama, why does it have to be so complex? This whole business of marriage and sex and all that. Why can't sex be like a game of tennis that I play at the Gymkhana club in the evening, come home, have a nice meal, be with the children, and why can't it be simple? And the reason for that is that unlike animals, and for animals it's nature. They feel desire and then they fulfill their desires. But human beings are different because they have an imagination. And when they meet somebody, and when there is fascination, our imaginations create a fantasy around that one person. And so romantic love is born. And so sex is not about nature, it is about culture. And society has found this charming inclination in human beings to create the institution of marriage and to make sure that human beings do not, they live a civilized life. The psychologist Freud understood Amar's dilemma. And Freud wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontents. And the discontent of Amar, Freud says, is because human beings society makes sure that human beings, in all cultures, they convert that energy of karma, that cosmic energy of karma, into what he calls sublimate human being, sublimation, and that is how culture, civilization is born, because we sublimate, and that same energy gets channeled into great. If you are an architect, you produce, like Ahmedabad has been very lucky to have great architects come in the 60s and 50s who created so many beautiful buildings, Corbusier, and that building of the Mill Owners Association. Louis Kahn did IIM, Ahmedabad, and so on. Anyway, my point is turns into great art, great books, great Shakespeare, etc. But ultimately, what does it do? What is plentiful in nature, and for animals it's plentiful, becomes scarce in human life, which is sex, becomes scarce. It's like what, if you know about diamonds, Gujaratis know about diamonds. And so many of you might be from Palanpur, but De Beers, the company which mines diamonds in South Africa, creates artificial scarcity, keeping the diamonds underground, so the price of diamonds doesn't drop too much, or it keeps rising slowly. So the next question that we should ask ourselves is why have we were a very open culture in the past, and we became so prudish today. We can't even discuss this subject, and we push it under the carpet. We never talk about it with our parents, and we have this sort of, anyway, you know what I'm talking about, that the reason why I say we were very open is, let me illustrate to you a couple of stories in the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, Yudhishthir at one point asks Bhishma, he says, who enjoys sex more, a man or a woman? And Bhishma says, well, you've got to be a man and a woman to answer that question. The same person has to be. And then he remembers that there was King Bhangashvana, who was for first half of his life a man, and the second half of his life as a woman. And because he was a good person, at the end of his life, he is given a choice. What would you like to be reborn as, a man or a woman in your next life? And he says, as a woman. And people say, are you crazy? You could be the emperor. You've been such a successful king. Why do you want to be a woman? And you know what he says? Because women enjoy sex more. And also, he says that the emotional life is far richer than the public life of a king or a CEO or an entrepreneur or whatever. And so, that's why I realized that E.M. Foster said the same thing. You know, the one who wrote Passage to India. E.M. Foster wrote a book called 2 Cheers for Democracy. And people asked, but why not 3 cheers for democracy? And he said, I reserve 3 cheers for the private life and not for the public life. So he was saying the same thing. I'll give you another quick example from the Mahabharata. There's a young man named Shvetaketu. Now you may remember him from the Upanishads also. Shvetaketu sees his mother go out at night with a different man. And he looks at his father, and his father doesn't seem bothered. She goes the second night, third night, she comes back in the morning. And finally he tells his father, doesn't it bother you that your wife goes out at night like this? And Shvetaketu's father says, no, we are polygamous. That's how human beings are. And of course science has shown that we were polygamous and later we became monogamous. And so when Shvetaketu grows older, he becomes a lawgiver, and he gives the law that that basically he says that sex will be confined to marriage, there will be monogamy and not polygamy. So, you know, we tend to blame the British, the Victorians, for having turned prudish. Some people even blame the Muslims. No, it's not true. Right from the beginning, from the Upanishads, the yogis, the rishis had a great problem with desire. The Gita also. And the Buddha, the Jains, huge problem with desire. And so the history of karma is a history of a clash between karma optimists who elevated karma to a goal of life, the Vedic people, and the people who wrote the Kama Sutra, and the Sanskrit love poetry, and Khajuraho and all that. And the karma pessimists were the rishis, the various saints, etc. So then came the karma realists. And the karma realists, like Shvetaketu, said they made a compromise between the karma optimists and the karma realists, because both were not viable. The karma pessimists said you must be celibate, and the karma optimists sort of thought of sex as a game of tennis. And so we had this compromise, and karma realists wrote down in the Dharma Shastras. The texts of the Dharma Shastras are precisely that sex is all right as long as it's within marriage. And it's in all the cultures, the same thing happened in a different way. And so in India, we had Gandhi, who was a karma pessimist. We had Nehru, who was a karma optimist. And the answer here is that the secret lies, as I said, in achieving a kind of balance. A balance where we can also fulfill our duty to ourselves. And now, I think I'm running out of time. Do we have about 5 minutes more? Okay, because I want to then raise this question that how can this karma be a cosmic force in nature which gave birth to the universe, and also be this human intimate sort of attraction, and which creates love. And the link word is tapas. You see, the cosmos was created from tapas, from the heat. The Big Bang was created from the heat. And also, it's the tapas is the tapasya that the yogi does, where he ensures that the semen rises rather than going down. And it's the same heat, tapas, of the sexual act. So there's a relationship with the cosmic force and the intimate force between human beings. And I could go on, but the last point I just want to make is that the idea of romantic love actually is quite recent in human history. Sure, we have the story of Nala and Damayanti in the Mahabharata, which is a romantic story, but it's different. And it'll take me time to explain that. But just the amazing thing is that romantic love was born on 3 continents at the same time in the 12th century. It was expressed in Europe in the great epic called Tristan Isolde, where actually it ends in death. Often in romantic love, death is the end, like Romeo and Juliet. You may be familiar with that. And in the Islamic world, it was the story of Layla and Majnun. Beautiful story written by a writer in Persia, in Persian, and it is by Nizami. But in India, it happened also at the same time. It was the love of Radha and Krishna. Now, the most beautiful rendition of that is a poem called Gita Govinda by Jayadeva. Some of you may know it. And the genius of that poem is the fact that you never know whether this is divine love, the love of God for a soul, or the soul's yearning of divine, or is it human love? Because Krishna is not doesn't dance with 40,000 gopis in Ras Leela for one Brahma night, which is equal to 4.5 billion human years, but he also desires one woman. A god desires one woman, and she's married. So it is the adulterous love. Radha is married. It's the adulterous love of God for one woman. And ever since the 12th century, the Gita Govinda has been sung every night in the temple of Jagannath in Puri, on the coast of Orissa. Anyway, why romantic love took a turn to divine love is a long story. But to end, let me just say to you that, I was going to talk to you a little bit about the Shiva, the erotic ascetic, and some other things. Let me just skip over all that and just say a couple of things in conclusion. One is that the readings I've done to write this book, by the way, it looks thicker than it is because the font is big. So for older people, that's a nice thing. And what I want to say is that just as King Bangashvana said about the importance of the emotional life, and what is important is, like the Mahabharata, we should be open and talk, not repress it. Because when we repress it, then we perpetuate stereotypes of patriarchy. And patriarchy is basically male dominance. And so in we are living in an important time in history, which is, if you think 1947, think of landmarks in our history. 1947, we got our political freedom. But we didn't get our economic freedom. That we got in 1991, when the reforms began. Now, in the end of 2018 is also a watershed moment, because thanks partly to Supreme Court, there have been some wonderful judgments that the Supreme Court has made. One was on triple talaq. One was, which is liberated the Muslim woman. The second was when they decriminalized homosexuality and adultery. Both of these were colonial laws, and they did not come from our culture. They were impositions. Another was the entry of women into temples, and also the Me Too movement. Nobody imagined that at a time like this, when globalization is under attack from Mr. Trump, from Brexit, from everybody, actually, one idea a year ago in America, just 12 months ago, has come and flowered in India and has got a lot of men into trouble for doing wrong things. But this is not India alone. If you look at the Google map of Me Too movement, it's all over the world. Even Kazakhstan, Muslim Kazakhstan, has a very lively Me Too movement. Anyway, that is just a thought here for you. And so today I've spoken to you about two ways to look at human happiness. One is to love the work you do and love the person you live with. And second is fulfilling the capabilities we all have as human beings through the four different purusharthas. These are two different ways to look at it. So let me end there, and we can take a few questions. Yeah, no, it's all right. I can stand and fine.
So let's go for questions and answer questions for him. Yes, sir.
Sir, generally, the planned life is only for 20% of the people. The main plan is I want to be an engineer and I become an engineer. But generally it is not so. What we do is, what we get, we proceed.
Right,
That is for 80%.
right.
Now, how different it is for making a living and making life for these two categories, this
Well,
20% and 80%.
Yeah, you're right that most of our lives are based on accidents, and its planned lives are very few, and certainly in my case also, it was I could never have predicted that by the age 50 I would become a full-time writer, when I had been CEO of Procter & Gamble, or when I had been head of global strategic planning for the whole corporation worldwide, abroad. So you're absolutely right. My point is that most of us, or many of us, are like me, who feels after stumbling through life, we have this question in our minds, nagging doubt, is this what life is all about? Now, I have given you some ways to think about it today. I've given you certain ways to think about it, how to make a life. And I think we all have the capability, whether we do it through reading, through meditation, and through our own work. Some people make their work a pleasure. It's like a game that they play. They come to work and they get the same pleasure from their work as that. It depends. So there is no one way, but life for most of us is a series. There's luck also. You have to have luck of some kind. It's not everything that you can. हाँ, इनको दे दीजिए, हाँ, Mike. 24 hours.
Divides into making a living and making a life.
Right.
Everyone does it.
Right.
So finding a balance between fixing how many hours for making a living, how many hours to make a life.
Yeah.
That's the only.
You
that
can
is
do
for us to
that. You can do that. But what I've seen though, the unfortunate situation, and I've worked in 5 countries, all over the world, the problem exists of living a complete, happy, harmonious life. And that you can, I have already spoken about my formula or another way to think about it. That is really the, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. No, sorry.
Yeah, he was going to ask a question anyway.
Now, I would just like to ask you, what's the purpose of life? Why do we live?
Why do we live?
Yeah, what is the purpose of life?
Well, I think we each have to give ourselves a purpose. There is no, that's why I said that life is not about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself. And that's the purpose we give to life. There is no, unless you're a believer in God and other things like that. But if you're just like most of us, we have to create our own purpose. And I gave you some examples of thinking about that. Yes? Go ahead. There's one person after that. There's a lady. Okay, we'll go to the lady and then we'll go to the gentleman over there. Yes?
My question is, what is the difference between karma and karma?
Yeah.
What is the difference between karma and karma?
Right. Well, karma, as I told you, is desire and pleasure. Karma is a law of action and reaction, that the actions we do will bear fruit in ways, and that will have an impact on our lives. And if you believe in reincarnation, it will affect all your lives, not just one life. So that karma means action, some kind, what acts we do.
Good evening, sir. Sir, my question, when we compare living and life in today's generation and comparing it with the generation where Mahatma Gandhi ji dedicated his life for service to the society.
Yeah.
If today I want to serve the society without thinking about myself,
Right.
and the purpose, or I would say how I would earn my living, is it possible in today's generation that I 100% give myself to social service? Because today when I want to give my life to it, the second thought that comes to my mind is, the next day what will I eat?
Right.
So,
right.
yes.
So this is a very, very good question, and I think there are today opportunities. There are many NGOs, and they're professional NGOs, and you can earn a living doing good work, meaning working for the poor, working for various causes. And so my suggestion to you would be to look for an NGO that will suit and I'm sure in Ahmedabad there are lots of them. Famous NGO here is Seva. Seva is world famous, and this is from Ahmedabad, Ila Bhatt. So there are many opportunities to do that. You are lucky we are living at a time when this is happening.
Yeah, last.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank
over
you,
there.
sir.
Can you speak loudly so that?
No,
you
let
can-
him pass the mic, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, take it.
So thank you very much for the books that you have written and the articles that you keep writing. They are really wonderful, and thank you very much for that. Two questions, sir, subparts to each other. A, if you were to define karma in one line and dharma in one line, what would that be?
Yeah.
Second, in our entire history, mythological or historical, Indian context, who would be the person you'll see as the epitome of dharma?
Okay, that's a good question.
Thank you.
So what is in one line, karma and dharma was your first question. And actually I did it all in less than one line. One sentence I had both, where I said dharma is a duty to the other person and karma is a duty to yourself. That is, and so that Amar's dilemma, his dharma sankat, is precisely this problem. You see, he doesn't, and you'll be surprised if you read the book. The story has a nice twist to it, but this is part of the story, and it's a story of our life. The second question was?
Someone who epitomizes dharma.
Well, we can all choose our favorite people. The great people that come always to mind are people like Mahatma Gandhi, who is of course from here, and the Buddha, who has now 500 million followers in the world. And there are many other figures that we can choose to who we would regard as dharmic heroes. In mythology, of course, you won't find them in the Mahabharata because good people do bad and bad people do good all the time. But you'll find it in the Ramayana, where you have the Rama, perfect hero, perfect wife, Sita, perfect brother, perfect, even the villain is perfect.
I think the last question from there. Yeah.
Sir, in our scripture, there is much importance is given to celibacy. So what is your opinion about that?
Well, I think that, frankly, I think that is wrong. Frankly, this was one of the places where I disagreed with Gandhi. And Gandhi did not get that from the Indian tradition. He got it from Tolstoy, who wrote a book called Kreuzer's Sonata. And the book was banned because he advocated for the human race celibacy. And the authorities everywhere got worried that there'll be no population if we are all celibate. So I think it's the middle path. And the middle path is a very sensible idea that our happiness consists in fulfilling all our capabilities in artha, dharma, kama, moksha. And when they are in harmony, that constitutes bliss, ananda, happiness. And sometimes, when life gets too much for me, I go to the National Museum in Delhi and there is a statue from the Gupta period of a woman statue. Her smile is the smile of that harmony, of that middle path that I was talking about. So celibacy is an extreme, and it is not, to me, it's better to have multiple goals than one goal in life. Okay. So,
Sir, one more question. I have one question, and that is you made a passing comment about, a Hindu can be one who doesn't believe in reincarnation, in karma, and the entire philosophy of so-called Hinduism, and still be a Hindu. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you had in mind?
you see, we had a very respectable philosophical school of Charvaks in ancient India. Lokayats, they were also called. And they were Gnostics. So they were Astics and Gnostics. And Gnostic is also acceptable. That is the greatness of our tradition, that we accept people. We accept people. In fact, this week I have written a column that will appear sometime, I don't know, in the next few days, in the Times of India, about who we are as Indians. It's an interesting story that I'm telling you in there. But the idea, Hinduism is a way of life. It allows for different beliefs. And that's why when the Christians came, or when the Muslims came to India, we said, no problem, we'll make Allah also one of our gods. We have 330 million, 33 crores. Ek aur ho jayega. And they were horrified. When the Christians came to India, we said, we'll make Jesus one of our gods. And they were horrified by that. So I think that is the genius of our tradition, that we are accepting also of Gnostics and of Astics.
Yeah, just 2 minutes to express our gratitude. Thank you, Sri Gurcharan Das, for choosing AMA to release this book in the city of Ahmedabad and making this evening truly wonderful. And you'll all agree, friends, we are so much honored to have such a highly accomplished person, scholar. I think so many words, but I want to waste time to describe him. Sunil Bhai describe his biodata, his accomplishments. So we are truly, truly honored to have you here once again. About 4 years ago, he was here, JB Auditorium, to release his earlier book, The Difficulties of Being Good. And you'll also agree that he dealt with this sensitive subject in a very different way. So not to repeat what he said, but I will observe that while he was talking, we were all, it was like as if time stood still, for all of us. But again, not repeating what he said, but the most powerful message he gave today, and he said it 2 times, that about happiness in human beings is to love the work you do and to love the person you love with. And that's how we narrated a couple of things. And again, not repeating what he said. So once again, thank you for making this evening so fulfilling for all of us. Audience, thank you for attending in such large numbers on a weekday. And again, these wonderful questions, which really filled in some of the gaps in the limited time we had. But these questions were definitely connecting the dots. And as Sunil Bhai said, the book is available outside, and he will also sit outside to sign and autograph this book. Once again, thank you so much, and wish you a very good evening. Thank you.